single one of them, you know. This, let me tell you, see this here? This is a walk in the park compared to running the snooker tournament. This really is. This is like this is wee buns. Absolutely. You know, have you ever heard of that expression, wee buns?
Wee buns? No, not really.
Is it Irish or English? I don't know. I think it just means it's easier.
I don't, isn't it?
You know, Murphy's still ringing me up at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to get onto the show. I don't know.
Is he really?
Listen, he's fighting with a wife. I did tell him not to marry an Irish woman. They're nothing but bloody trouble. Okay? You know, we're just waiting for the connection to get running here, but we are. You know, why doesn't he bother somebody like Jordan Brown or something? Why is he ringing me? You know, I don't get it. I don't understand it. You know? Oh. Anyway, I think we're just about to go live, actually, Chris. So,
yeah, go for it.
Let's have a look to see if we are going live. Are we live? Are we live? I think we're live. I think we are. Are we? Okay. Right. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Chris Henry again. Back on. We're going to talk about snooker again, unfortunately. I know some of you would rather sit at home and watch a movie or watch flies die on the wall, but we're going to talk about snooker. We're going to get in depth tonight. And we got Chris Henry again. You know, he doesn't tell jokes. You don't sing, do you, Chris? But, you know, you can go on a bit.
Go on as long as you like, mate. Absolutely.
Here to help. And tonight, this is all about you. This is your gig tonight, buddy. We're going to talk about the things that you've been mentioning in the past, just prior to coming on here and doing stuff. And I've got a hell of a lot to cover, actually, you know. And we're going to talk about the mental process again. So that's probably the easiest way for me to sort of describe the kind of things that we're going to talk about this evening. And just getting a wee bit specific, we're going to be talking about rewiring the brain for peak performance. I think that's how you put it, Chris. You know, establishing effective habitual cue ball striking and aiming. We're going to get into that.
Very good.
Are we actually allowed to talk about your shot routines? Are we allowed to do that a little bit later? Are we allowed to talk about
Yeah, we can talk about some of those.
We're going to talk about subconscious nerves. We're going to talk about drinking while playing, and if you get beat, we're going to talk about going down to the river in Stratford looking for love. Me and Chris have done it many times, but he's too old. I'm much younger, and they all come to me, but it's okay. He can feed the swans, you know. We're going to touch on comfort zones as well. We're going to talk about comfort zones. All right, we'll talk about that too. But other than that, if you're not interested in any of this, go and order a Vindaloo. I don't care what you do. You know, I don't care. So anyway, Chris, we're going to start. All right, we can start wherever you like. Now, when we're talking about developing effective habitual cue ball striking and aiming, is this a new training process that you've established, or is this something we need to talk about?
Well, it's something that has developed over the years. I think my sort of delving into neuroscience and understanding how the brain works, developing effective habits, and mostly, you know, but then it was more about technique and developing a technique that works and is going to stand up under pressure, under, you know, the kind of pressure, well, the kind of emotional state that you're experiencing, which actually is another way of saying pressure. There actually isn't any pressure. It's just an emotional state that you're experiencing based on the information that's being received by the brain and how it's interpreting that information. So, yeah, cue ball striking and aiming are the two first keys that anybody who's trying to play snooker at a decent level, they need to develop those two skills very effectively. With repetition, they make them habits. So at a certain point of repetition, they don't have to think anymore about how to do it. They just let it happen, and it happens by habit. So these are two keys, and we're going to cover a little bit about, I'm not going to go too technical, Dave, don't worry, but we're going to talk a little bit about neurogenesis.
That's shocking. Shocking. You just froze on screen at the perfect time as well, just before you had to explain that to me. It's all right, guys. I'm the one with a good stream here. Henry's got a tablet. What can I say? He'll be back in a second. Are you there, Chris? Can you hear me? Go out and come back in again. Maybe you should try that. Anyway, well, Chris is frozen on the screen, just in case you can't hear me. I've got the balls here, guys. The balls are actually going to be part of Chris's training when he comes over and joins us at the Stratford Club in Stratford upon Avon. We're going to be doing some coaching days there. I'll talk to you about very briefly while we're waiting for Chris to come back on again. And it's going to involve some amateurs and some professionals coming down to the club. And we're going to be talking about all the kind of things we're talking about this evening as we wait for Chris to come back in again. Just take him out, remove him, bring him back in. It's a good job this is not live television, isn't it? It'd be an absolute disaster if this was Sky or BBC, you know. But yes, Chris is going to come over to Stratford upon Avon, and we're going to do some coaching days there for you, which we will announce. Obviously, we've got to get permission from the club and what have you, and get some of the dates sorted out for the year. But and it's going to involve pretty much everything that we're going to talk about this evening in terms of getting down to the nitty gritty on the table. Okay, all right. Oh. All right, that's okay. Looks like he's going to come back in again. Let's see if we can bring you back in. Mitch. Here he goes. Me, how's that? That's all right. That's the first time you've ever done that to me.
Well,
you know?
It was, you just sort of disappeared. I don't know what happened.
I disappeared. I'm the one hosting the show. How come I disappeared?
Strange.
I'm going to play this back later to see if you've disappeared, I haven't disappeared. That's it. You're never going to get your own TV show. You know that, don't you? Keep doing this. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah, so I was just talking a little bit about some of the neuroscience things, neurogenesis, synaptogenesis, axon, myelination, important things that we need to understand a little bit about, because this is how you create the right habits and beliefs to be able to perform at your best. Also a little bit about neuroplasticity and how that affects things. So the first thing we're going to look at is what we call competence. Okay, you're still there, yeah. You keep freezing. Yeah. We're going to talk about competence, the actual skills on the table that we need to develop. And those two first keys are striking and aiming. So we've got to look at players and understand, can they strike that cue ball where they're intending to strike it? That's the first skill in snooker. And it's incredible. Many players do these things in different ways. You've got many different kinds of techniques that are actually very effective. So as coaches, we've got to be very careful not to be changing things with players that don't need to be changed. So it's very important initially to establish these two skills with the player. And a lot of players are not textbook. They don't look like a textbook type snooker player where they're doing things textbook, but they're very effective. You know, some examples of that would be, well, one of them would be Judd Trump. You know, he's not textbook at all. He's off center. He cues across the cue ball, but he manages on the majority of time to strike where intended. So you've got to establish that point. And if a player can strike where intended, then guess what? We're not going to actually touch anything that he's doing, because that's very important. If he can't strike the cue ball where intended, we've got to identify why he can't do that and what elements of his game do we need to change that will allow him to actually strike where intended. So it could be a visual problem where many players are addressing the cue ball in a position on the white ball that they are not aware of. So for example, some players might be addressing with a little bit of side spin and striking that side spin, which would point towards a visual problem. Because if they're addressing with a little bit of left and they're striking with a little bit of left, then the technique is fine. They're striking where they're addressing. Some players are actually addressing in the middle of the cue ball when they want to strike centre ball for a particular kind of shot, but they're not able to do that. So that would point towards a technical mechanical problem, because the address position is good, but the strike is not good. That's now becoming more of a technical problem. Some players will address on one side of the ball and hit the other side of the ball because the mechanics are so off. So then you've got to start looking at the key aspects of grip and bridge and the distances between the bridge and the cue ball and the distance between the bridge and the grip. They're the two major elements of technique mechanics and how your mechanics are actually going to work. So you've got to play around a little bit with things like that. But it's very, very important as a coach to understand if a player can't do that first thing, strike where intended, you've got to understand why that is. Is it a visual problem or is it a technical problem? And sometimes it's both. So I'll give you an example. You know, Shawn Murphy or Selby, you know, they are players that had slightly differing problems. One of them not able to strike where intended. The other one was able to strike where intended. So one of them you play around with the technique a little bit. The other one you leave it completely. And it's very important that you establish these things. And like I said, it's not always a textbook technique that produces very effective cue ball striking. Now, the other side of that is that the aiming of the shot has become very interesting to me because we're not seeing with our eyes. And that sounds a little bit weird. The visual cortex at the back of our brain is interpreting the information that our eyes are sending to it. And it can actually cause us to aim shots to miss, but we're not. And that is a player that is what we call uncoordinated. They're not coordinated. Their mechanics are not coordinating with their vision. So that is goal number one. Striking and aiming, coordination by habit without having to think about it. And then you can concentrate on the things you need to concentrate on, because ultimately you should not be thinking about your technique when you're playing snooker. That should all be wired into your brain as a habit, and it's just firing off. And that's the competence side of snooker, being able to do those two skills. Once you are a balanced snooker player, and when I say balanced, it means when you want to apply a little bit of left-hand side, you apply a little bit of left-hand side. When you want to apply a little bit of right-hand side, that's what you apply. When you want to play a plain ball, middle ball shot, you're able to do that as well. You've got to get that coordination and balance in place and habitualize it so that it fires the right way without having to think about it. So very important as a coach, if there are any coaches out there, you've got to try and help the player to develop those two skills in the best possible way for these. That's a nice cat.
Yeah, she almost get off the table. She's lonely. She's lonely. Okay, carry on.
Yeah, like I was saying, a coach has to try and identify that players can do these two things and not change the things that don't need changing, but look at the things that do need changing and helping players to develop these habits. So you've seen that product that I brought out, Dave, just over 2 years ago now, and that was specifically developed for these two skills because they're only 17 grams, the balls, and they give you very quick feedback. They very, very quickly tell you where you're striking. Yeah, that's the cue ball. And the red ball will tell you very quickly where you're aiming the shot. And so with repetition, with effective repetition, you start to develop those two skills. Just on that note, by the way, we've got the balls for American pool, a bigger ball size that's going to be launched in October. So that's coming out as well.
Chris, isn't that often the case that players don't realize they're incurring these problems? Like perhaps maybe putting side on the ball, not striking the cue ball, and that only a coach like yourself can actually recognize this problem?
Yeah, it's a very good question, Dave. Well, we talked about those two players before, Shawn Murphy and Selby, the two world finalists. One of them was having a problem striking where intended. That was Shawn Murphy. And he also had one or two issues with aiming as well. But Mark Selby was actually striking where intended, and he thought he had a technical problem. But he didn't have a technical problem. He was striking exactly where intended. But he was actually aiming the shot to miss. He wasn't aware of it. So it's a bit like, I know you're very much into shooting. It's a little bit like having a very expensive rifle and subconsciously aiming it slightly to the side of the target you're trying to hit, pulling the trigger, hitting that side of the target and thinking, well, I've aimed it correctly. What's wrong with the gun?
There's no wind on the snooker table, Chris.
No. Well, I mean, absolutely. There shouldn't be. So it's incredible that the brain can actually cause a player to miss shots without them being consciously aware of it. So what we do is we identify it, and then with some very effective repetition, if that player is what we call technically and visually uncoordinated, like this, with this repetition, slowly the coordination starts to come back. And then by habit, they can just go and play without having to think too much about what they're doing. So yeah, those two balls, they're really very effective. And what they're basically all about is developing very good habits of visuals and mechanics in a very small tolerance, a tight tolerance. This is a bit like, in other sports, like Johnny Wilkinson used to kick the ball through the goalposts, but actually they put a piece of string between the posts and a little target, and he had to hit that small target and get very good at that. So that's when your brain, we talked a little bit about neurogenesis and how your brain creates neurons, develops new neurons. And synaptogenesis is when the brain's neurons start to connect together with repetition, and you start to develop habits of mechanics and vision. It's incredible how all this stuff actually works. So repeating things in a tight tolerance is a very good practice, because if you fall outside of that tolerance slightly that you've been habitualizing, with a 142 gram ball, you're still going to be fine. And that's a big aspect. So also, Dave, players can get those balls and identify these things alone. They don't necessarily need somebody to be there, because they can see it for themselves. What I would say is the issue is most players would not then know what to fix. They might not understand what aspects of their technical or visual things they might need to work on to correct it the right way. And that's when a coach who has the knowledge of this information required, then that's when it can be very effective.
I think a lot of players, a lot of the guys who'll watch this, either watch it a bit later on, they'll understand a lot of what you're saying, but they'll still sort of think about how to fix their problems. I mean, a lot of the players, for example, are cross dominant. A lot of players will play very naturally, and I think their brain does this more than anything. It sort of creates this ability to cue underneath the dominant eye, whichever eye it is. I mean, I've seen some really talented players cue quite extraordinary, Chris, how they cue nearly right the other side of the face, almost. And is that the brain telling them how to line up the shot?
Yeah, that's the brain's interpretation of what the eyes are sending to it. You've got players like, it's quite a number of different players. You've got, Jamie Jones, who's very, very left eye sighted. You have Rhiannon Evans, who did incredibly well at the last tournament. She was very close to pulling off a big shot there. She's very, very left eye sighted. You've got other players like Ashley Carty, who's very right eye sighted, really right over this side. Even Neil Robertson is left handed, but his cue is actually outside of both eyes, incredibly, in terms of the line of the aim. And that's the brain. That's the brain fixing these things for the player. And everybody sees that line in a different way. So you've got to help a player find the visual line that their brain is interpreting the correct way for them, so that it looks correct for them. And everybody's different.
So just touching on this business of cue ball striking, Chris, just go back to cue ball striking, touching on that one again. Is this a problem for cross dominant snooker players? You know, just in case some of the lads out there don't know what I'm talking about, cross dominance is when you're perhaps maybe left-eyed and right-handed, or vice versa. Does this create a problem, or could this be specifically a problem for that type of player?
It potentially can cause problems, but the great thing is you can retrain your brain to see things the correct way with effective repetition. So it's about fine-tuning. It's about, first of all, identification, getting the feedback to understand if there is a problem, what is that problem? Is it a technical problem, or is it a visual problem? And then through repetition, you can retrain the brain to see it correctly. That's incredible. That's synaptogenesis. That's creating synapses in your brain, where you're creating these neurons that connect together. And then there's something very interesting called myelination, where basically you've got a little piece of software in your brain called a habit. And it's a little cluster of neurons that you've created through repetition. And they cluster together like this, very small in the brain. But those little pieces of software are connected through your spinal cord down to your muscles via what's called axons. And they're like minute little cells, little wires. And through repetition, this insulation starts to build around the axon, the wire. And it basically means that the information from the brain can get through to the muscles very, very fast, very, very efficiently. And that starts to promote what's called the zone, where you can really start to do something effectively without having to think about what you're doing. A little bit like walking. You now don't need to think about how you walk. You don't necessarily have to think about how you drive a car. You can, once you've done it enough times, you can just drive. So that's it's all fascinating when you're creating all these connections in your brain, and then myelinating this axon, which connects your muscles, which then starts to become very habitual.
Is this something you recognize, Chris, when you meet players, when you watch players, especially? I mean, can you recognize when you watch players on television, for example, if they're perhaps striking the ball incorrectly, if they're putting side on the ball? Is this something you yourself? What
you can do with that, you can obviously, it's very, if the camera's directly behind it at the line of a shot, there's a lot you can see. So you can pause the player and press, and you can pause it and when he strikes, or her when she strikes. And based on where they're addressing and where they're striking, you can then start to look at technique, visuals, all of that stuff. It becomes quite clear, actually, yeah. If you know what you're looking for, it can be quite evident, it can be quite clear. And then there's other points, like when you strike that cue ball, where should your eyes be actually focused? Where should you be looking? And this is a big subject that has been going around now for quite some years, probably my fault for starting it. But some of the top players in the world are focused on the cue ball when they strike, incredibly. Now, that might not make sense. And some of the players are actually focused on the object ball when they strike the cue ball. Some of the cue ball players, probably arguably the three greatest players so far, are all cue ball players. They actually look at the cue ball when they strike, and that's Ronnie O'Sullivan, Stephen Hendry, and John Higgins. Other players like Neil Robertson, they'll look at the object ball. So we now know that the brain actually blinks at impact. You don't actually see the strike. So that then means that it's not as important where you're looking, because you're not actually seeing it anyway, which is a little bit mind-blowing.
Well, I mean, it's like this is the player's way of adjusting to his technique. So his brain's telling him he might look as if he's cueing off the shot. It may look as if maybe we'll use the example of Judd Trump, who's not textbook. Judd looks as if he fixes something, that looks potentially very damaging. You know, does that make sense? I mean, it looks like when he gets down on the shot, I mean, some of his shots are horrible. He misses by quite a few inches when they go wrong. And maybe that looks as if perhaps maybe that's the way the shot should establish itself, but it doesn't. But somewhere during his process of cueing and striking, he compensates. He feigns the cue ball exactly where he wants. Otherwise, he wouldn't do these amazing things on the table, would he?
No. Well, what Judd does, he actually sets the whole shot up offline. So it's like having a rifle and pointing that rifle right of the target, for example. And then just at the last minute, he makes a little adjustment and comes back towards the target and pulls the trigger. Now, the timing of that has to be very, very good. The timing has to be spot on. And of course, when a player gets nervous and anxious and a little bit of muscle tension starts to kick in, that coordination and timing can change. And that's why sometimes you'll see Judd miss by quite a way, because he'll be applying some unintentional side spin. And just on that point, we've got something called cue ball physics. And basically, the lower you play on the cue ball with side spin, the further it deflects that ball to the opposite side to the side spin that you apply. The higher you play on the cue ball, the less it deflects the cue ball to the opposite side to the side spin applied. That's just a basic cue ball physics rule. And that's why, you know, a long, deep screw shot is the most difficult shot. Because when you play it with a bit of power and you catch someone intentional side spin, the cue ball is going to deflect offline maximum, and you can miss a shot by feet. You know, with these new cloths, there's not very much friction on the cloth, so the new cloth can actually promote even more cue ball deflection.
No, it's interesting that, you know, and you mentioned obviously cue balls. We talk about cue ball strike, and we talk about the science of how the cue ball reacts when we make contact with the tip. I think a lot of players, I mean, it's obviously, I mean, this is just very, very basic stuff like cueing down on the cue ball. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's very difficult to avoid not putting any side on the ball if you're cueing down on top of the ball. Whereas a lot of players like Jimmy White, for example, who have always played very, very low on the cue ball striking, and it's probably the best place to actually contact the cue ball. If you can play low or just below center quite a lot on the time, there's less margin for error, perhaps.
Well, Jimmy's the kind of player, he's got a technique that actually lifts. So he might appear to be striking the cue ball very low. He addresses the cue ball very low. And actually, the lower you go, the more you can actually see where middle is, because obviously that point where it touches the cloth is center ball. It's the middle of the ball, isn't it? But actually, he doesn't strike down there. He strikes a little bit higher. So he has a technique that goes slightly higher as he strikes. Some players have a technique that goes slightly lower when they strike. So again, they might be the kind of player that would address a little bit higher, but strike lower. Jimmy's just a low addresser and actually strikes the ball a little bit higher than where he addresses.
It's funny, you know.
There's all these interesting aspects.
You know, a man who's been in my area here, a fellow called Charlie Poole, who was Jimmy White's old coach and mentor back in the early days, and was actually Charlie was recognizing that a lot of the players in the club were striking the ball too high, because Charlie's been coming to a lot of my events and watching top amateurs, you know, and he's been just having little chats with them about how they're applying side to the ball and where they're striking the cue ball, and he spots that straight away. He said, "Why you hit the ball high?
Yeah, you've got some people who are very analytical. They can see things very easily, very quickly. That's one element to being a good coach, being very analytical, being able to see things."
By the way, I'm drinking iced tea. Okay, it's not bloody whiskey. Somebody's made a comment earlier there now, you know. As much as, Chris, when I'm talking to you, I do need a whiskey, I have to say. It's still a bit early, and we're trying to keep this down to about an hour or so, aren't we? So, you know, there we are. But you can just carry on drinking your vodka and orange, okay? I don't mind. I don't mind at all. You know,
I wish it was vodka and orange, actually. I'm actually drinking a lemon, orange, and ginger in a beer glass.
So it's a difficult thing to fix for players. You know, like players are watching this, and they'll watch this later, and they'll try to get their heads around a lot of what we're trying to talk about. And I think it's always good to have a few players come up and say to you, you know what, Dave, you're actually not striking the center of the cue ball. It's pretty obvious to me that you're actually putting a little bit of left-hand side on the ball, which could account for you missing balls, missing shots. And you do actually need people to address this. You do need people to point this out to you. Chris, you know, I mean, it's important to have a coach. It's important to have people that can fix these tiny little things that you're doing wrong. How would you?
The higher level you go, the more it's about little fine tuning. You know, it's about little fine tuning in different areas. But you need to be with somebody who understands what they're doing. That's important. That's it. And just on that note, there you're talking about striking in the middle of the ball. Even on let's say a long straight shot, ideally, you know, when you're playing on different conditions and different cloths and different deflection degrees, ideally on a long straight shot, the player will strike central and aim to pot because it's more consistent. There's less variables. There are some players that will apply side spin. They'll aim to miss the shot and they'll deflect the cue ball back online to make the pot. The only problem with that is when you get used to your club cloth and the club, you know, the table that you play on at the club, and then you go and play it somewhere else where the conditions are different, you're not going to get the same cue ball reaction.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
If you struck the middle and aim to pot, doesn't matter what cloth you're playing on, it's going to be very consistent. However, most shots, Dave, are not straight. The vast majority of shots have angles. And 90-odd% of all those angle shots and 90-odd% of all the players, certainly the professionals, will not be attempting to strike the middle of that cue ball. They'll be playing with little bits of side spin, what we call a left to right angle shot. They'll play with a trace of left. It's just a natural thing to do. But the good thing with that is you know you're going to get it. So then you can start to adjust a little bit forward. And oppositely, right to left angles, you might address a little trace of right hand side. But like I said, if you're not balanced and you're intending to play with a little bit of side spin, you need to get that little bit of side spin. That's important.
How do we fix this when you're watching a player, Chris? I mean, you've dealt with many professionals and amateurs, good amateurs in the past, and what have you. Is this an easy? I don't know whether I've touched on this already, but is this an easy thing to fix? I mean, not striking the cue ball, not aiming correctly, and it's quite obvious to you that they're doing this. I mean, you recognize this with some of the professionals you've coached,
yeah.
And that. I mean, is it very difficult for them to fix?
So you've got to be very careful how you attempt to fix problems, especially with established players who have got a lot of habits already. You've got to look for the easiest way, but the most effective way. So when you start looking at changing grips, bridges, and stance, and elbow positions, and all, that's pretty big stuff, you know. That's a big change habitually. And so I prefer to look for things that can make the change, can actually fix problems without all the big changes, because it's just more easy to adjust to. I'll give you an example. You know, Shawn Murphy was applying some unintentional left-hand side spin. And basically what he was doing was he was arcing slightly to the left as he was striking the cue ball. Okay, now he has a nice grip, he has a nice bridge, but his mechanics were slightly right to left. So he was applying some side spin, and we established that. We established it where he could see it for himself. It wasn't just my opinion. I had to demonstrate it so he could see it, and he went, putting some left-hand side on there. That was a pretty straightforward fix, because what we did was, you've got this arc going towards the ball, okay, and he starts to put a little bit of unintentional left-hand side on. All we did, imagine that's the ball here, and this is the bridge here. We just moved everything slightly further forward a little bit. And what that did, it made the arc in his mechanics slightly later in the swing. So that meant that now he was striking where intended, the ball left the tip, and then a little arc came in after the strike. So now he's striking where intended. So it wasn't a very big fix. But unfortunately, you've got some advisors that would be looking at grip and bridges and elbows and stances. It wasn't required. It wasn't necessary. On the other side of things, you've got Mike Selby, who's actually striking where intended, but he was aiming the shot wrong. He was actually aiming to the left of the pocket with the red. But he was convinced because the visual is intangible. You can't touch that. And if you're not aware of it, how are you going to say I'm aiming to miss? So most players, guess what they blame? Technique. And then they start tinkering, playing around with their grip, playing around with their touch, changing angle positions on their elbow, moving the cue on their face to find a better point. You know, and there's ways to find the correct point with your vision. There's a very simple routine to do to get the correct point on your face. But actually, he was aiming to miss. What do we do? The visual cortex at the back of the brain is now uncoordinated. And it's aiming the shot to the left of the pocket. So guess how I fixed that? Basically, what I did was this. I said, right, Mark, I'd like you now to consciously miss the shot to the right jaw. Miss the shot slightly to the right side of the pocket. So he attempted to now play the same shot, consciously aiming to miss the shot slightly right jaw, because he's normally aiming left jaw. And guess where the red went? Have a guess.
Straight in.
It went straight in the pocket. He was convinced he was aiming to miss to the right. Now, the great thing with the brain is this. You aim to the right side of the pocket, you pot it. You aim to the right side of the pocket, you pot it. But with repetition, your brain is now wiring. And this mechanical and visual coordination starts to come together. Okay? And now, at that point, when it coordinates, the conscious aiming to the right causes a miss to the right.
Very interesting, because look, listen, that doesn't seem like actually. I mean, the explanation is perhaps not even complicated either, but it seems like an easy fix. Like, has Mark applied that to all of his cue ball striking? Did he find that easy to adjust to?
Sorry, I missed that last little bit there, Dave.
Did Mark adapt to that change, that fix? Did he adapt to it with all his cue ball striking? 3
to 4 days later, and don't forget, Mike Selby, when you tell Mike Selby to do something, he does it in abundance. He's a grafter. He's a worker. You ask him to do something, he's on it. 3 to 4 days later, 3 to 4 days later, he tells me, I'm actually missing to the right of the pocket now.
He is a thinker, though. He is a thinker. He looks as if he's thinking quite tactically, the way he wanders around the table and gives us all a headache. But I'm sure he's thinking about the next shot and what he's going to do.
Well, this is something we're working on to get him a little bit more instinctive. Sometimes he overthinks. He gives too much consideration to shots because he's trying to control things a little bit too much.
Can you make him a little bit more exciting?
3 to 4 days later, he's missing to the right of the pocket now. And now, if he aims to the pocket, it goes in the pocket.
Yep.
But if you stop this repetition, there's what's called synaptic pruning, where the neurons start to break up when you're not repeating something on a daily basis. So you start to lose these habits. So it's constant repetition. You've got to keep effective repetition going to maintain these mechanical and visual habits. So those two fixes, one was slightly moving closer with the bridge and the whole position to create a slightly later arc in the swing. And one was basically a visual conscious override until the visual and mechanics were coordinated again. And we're talking about two of the best players in the game.
Chris, I was just about to address this issue here. This is why you brought two guys to the final of the World Championship. How many coaches are going to do that? I'm not going to big you up here. Okay, I know you're one of the UK's top sports coaches. I know you are. I know you are because you've told me many times. But it doesn't matter about that. You've actually got these two lads to the final. You've coached a pair of them, which is a bit difficult actually, to a world championship final. You've worked on their cue ball control. You've worked on their shots. You've worked on their techniques, and you've got them where you want to go. So, just in case any of you lads are watching this now, are going to watch this video a little bit later, just take that on board. How many people are going to achieve that? But so yeah, so we've. My God, I can't believe I've just covered that little bit in just 45 minutes. Wow, you do go on a bit. I have to say, this is a reason why I only have you on once every 2 months.
We'll keep the next piece shorter, Dave. Don't worry.
Right. So let's. What should we touch on now? Should we touch on? We already did touch on rewiring a little bit, the brain and what have it. But you talk about things like optimum brainwave state. For peak performance, and we've touched on peak performance. So let's get into that a little bit without giving the guys a headache. Let's sort of get in the nitty gritty about that there. And we talk about peak performance is very important, Chris, because the guys have got to maintain their consistency, and that's what basically that's what takes them as far as they're going to go and makes them better than the rest. So how important is this?
Well, if you had a piece of paper in front of you now, Dave, and on the right side of the paper you wrote the word results. Okay, that's what everybody's trying to get, some good results. So then you work backwards. To the left of that word results, you'd have the word performance. And the reason we say performance is because if you're performing to a very high level, over time you're going to get some good results. That's just how that works. It's a numbers game. But the interesting thing is you can't control results, and even some players will argue this. You can't control your performance either. And the reason I say that to players is because if you could control your performance, why don't you play great every time? If you can control how you'd play great every time, but sometimes you don't. So then you work backwards again from performance to the left, and you've got something called emotions and how you feel. So the state that you're feeling, your emotional state, has a huge impact on performance. If you're outside of your comfort zone, and that's basically a zone that you're comfortable within because that's what you're used to, if you get outside of that zone, you're now going to a different emotional state, and that does not help your performance level. But because the subconscious is controlling emotion, then therefore you can't consciously control that either, because that's firing independently of your conscious brain. So then you work one step back from emotion, and that leaves you with thoughts and how you're thinking. But here's the interesting bit. Around 97% of all of our thoughts are on autopilot. They're just firing automatically by habit based on the thoughts that you've been thinking on a repetitive basis over a period of time. So only a very small percentage of your thoughts are chosen conscious thoughts. So we talked a little bit about the optimum brainwave state for performance, and that's what's called alpha brainwave state. In other words, Dave, it means calm, being calm, because that allows you to concentrate. But here's the interesting information. This little piece of software called snooker software that knows exactly how to swing that cue. It knows exactly how to deliver that cue by habit. It only communicates effectively with the physical body when we're in alpha or theta relaxed state. So that is always goal number one when you're performing in snooker or tennis or football. It doesn't really matter. You've got to be very focused, you've got to be very driven, but you need to be calm. Because that then means that the probability is you can get into what we call the zone. And the zone is a calm state where you're doing something without thinking about it consciously. It's just happening. So it's a little bit like a radio channel, Dave. If you turn that tuning knob slightly too far, you're going to hear some crackling. and the communication isn't clear. And that's a little bit like how this operates brain. You show this software to your physical body in a very optimum way. So calm state, alpha brainwave state is the optimum brainwave state for performance for very specific reasons.
So let's just touch on a couple of problems here, Chris. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about issues here, like things like we talked about being calm. Let's talk about frustration. Let's talk about the anger, the anguish, all the anxieties that the players are going through. Me and you have talked about these things many, many times. You know, sometimes we get the nitty gritty of them, but we're talking about brainwaves, you know, and creating that state of peak performance. But what can players do? What can players do? I see a lot of great players coming to my tournaments, Chris. A lot of young guys, a lot of kids who've got lots and lots of potential, but they have a massive problem with their temper.
Okay.
They have when everything's going well for them.
It's good.
When they're on the field, they're scoring really well. It's like 110, 89, 68, 120 dish. You know, it's like, and then when things are going wrong for them, it all falls apart.
Yeah.
So how can they? What are the kind of things that they need to look at here? What are the kind of things that they need to address in terms of what we're talking about?
I think the first aspect is for them to understand that calm is the optimum state. That's the first point. If they're not aware of that, then there's no real goal to try and maintain it. Because why would I? You know? So then we talk a little bit about the things you can control and the things you can't control. So you've got to be very good at focusing on the things you can control. One of the things that helps to maintain a calm brain is some effective breathing exercises. So all the players that I work with, when they go and sit down, they do one specific breathing exercise to oxygenate, which is very good for the blood and the brain. It slows everything down, and the heart. But the breathing out is so important because that's carbon dioxide, and that's the stuff that makes you very jittery and anxious. So you've got to keep getting that carbon dioxide out of your system. When a player gets into this angry, frustrated state, after a frame, it's to the toilet. And we use something called catharsis, because now you're in the wrong brainwave state. So you've got to get back to a good state. And you literally do something what Tiger Woods would do, Djokovic, Federer, some of these top guys. For 10 seconds, you literally let rip. You go for it, right? Now you're allowed to let it out. But you're doing something in a very specific way. You're reminding yourself in that aggressive 10 seconds, you better get yourself back into that room now and make sure you focus on this and this. But you're doing it in a very aggressive, positive way, okay? And what's happening in the brain now, you're getting rid of this cortisol that's now coming to the front of the brain, clouding your thinking, making you angry and frustrated. You're now getting rid of this stuff and bringing more endorphin and some dopamine and better chemicals to make you feel better.
So this is kind of, sorry, carry on, Chris.
You follow that 10 seconds aggressive reminder of what you need to be doing back in the arena with a little bit of breathing again, just to slow it back down again, get the carbon dioxide out, back into the arena, focus on the one or two keys that you need to be very good at to be performing. And, you know, I advised Shawn during the World Championships, who was playing against Kyron Wilson specifically, and he was in the wrong state. So guess what he started to do? Come on! Remember that? And he started to change the way he felt. But that has an impact on the crowd. They love it. They're getting involved. The atmosphere in the room changes. And it also affects your opponent as well. Your opponent's looking at that and thinking, Mike, this guy thinks he can win. He's 6-2 down. He's bounding around the table like he's winning. That's the kind of thing you can do to change your brainwave state and get back to where you need to be.
You know, I've never, you know, Chris, I've never actually, I'll be absolutely honest with you, I never really thought about it that way, you know, and you know, if I was playing at one of those events and I went into the toilet and shouted at the mirror, I'm pretty sure they'd throw me out.
Well,
hear me.
Come
on! I mean, I shouted at players, Chris. I shouted at the players.
It has to be an aggressive, loud whisper. It's, come on, you can do this. You can't shout because, like you say, you're going to get people thinking you're an absolute maniac. So it has to be a whisper or even a towel over the face where you can do it there. Djokovic does that when he sits down sometimes. Yeah. Towel over the face and you can see his head's going on.
Yep. That's a good.
You're saying you're an idiot, you're useless, you can't do it, you're not good enough. That's not going to help. You've got to have your 2 or 3 keys ready when you go and do this catharsis and you get rid of this emotion. You've got to have some reminders of what you're going to be getting back into that arena to focus on, and then a bit of breathing to calm it all back down again.
It's a bit like having an argument just to clear the air. You know, it's like dealing with your demons. You know, you gotta. I mean, this goes for anything, doesn't it? You know, you have a fight with a wife like you do all the time. You know, just go outside into the garden and shout at the dogs,
right? And
then come back in again, and she'll leave you alone.
But you'll feel better. You'll actually feel better if you do it in the right way, not a negative way. If you do it in the right way, you can actually get rid of these chemicals that are not helping, and you can bring some better stuff into your brain to make you feel a bit better.
Thinking, dealing with it. There you go, guys. That was a very, very interesting piece of information for you there when you're, I don't know, 3-1 down, the best of 7. Go into that toilet and just sort it out. Look in the mirror and say, you can do this. You can do this. Or otherwise, if you can't
get back out and you need to be doing that again, whatever it was you were doing before.
And me. Oh. It's too late for me. I shouted. Listen, if you were running tournaments like I do, you'd see exactly where I'm coming from. But no, I love them all. I don't, you know, they're all good guys. You know, they just,
sure.
It does frustrate me. You know?
Just moving on, Dave. One thing that sports psychologists talk a lot about is self-belief.
Yep.
You know, the Brits are very good at saying things like, I'll believe it when I see it. But in sport, it's a little bit the opposite way around. You've got to get to a level of belief and certainty that what you're attempting to do, you believe you can. Because that's then promoting a state of certainty and confidence. And that word confidence is important. When you genuinely believe you can, there's more probability you're going to be confident when you're doing it. But what is, and this is a question for you, Dave. What is belief? What is that? So when I speak to this neuroscientist in San Diego and I say, what is a belief system? And he says to me, I'm going to show you one inside a brain. So a habit, when you're doing something physically by habit, it's a cluster of neurons in your brain caused by repetition. When you've got enough of them, it starts to fire automatically. It controls you without thinking. A belief system is exactly the same. It's how you're thinking about something over time. Your brain wires a cluster of neurons together, and you create a belief about something. Okay? I'll give you an example, Dave. You've got a wild horse, and you want to ride this horse. The problem is, you get on the horse, and because it's wild, it keeps bucking you off. And each time you get on the horse's brain is doing this. Wires, it wires, it wires, it wires. And through repetition, when you've got enough of those, I can't get this guy off my back neural connections in the brain, you break the horse in. And it stops trying to get rid of you. It gives up. Because the horse now believes, can't get this guy off, stop trying, break him in, now you can go and ride him. That is a belief that's been created inside that horse's brain. So we can create and design beliefs about anything we want, because the subconscious part of the brain where beliefs live does not know the difference between real and not real. So how do we know that? How can we give some evidence of that? The subconscious where these things live does not know the difference between real and not real. And the example of that is, you go to bed tonight at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're nice and safe and warm, You have a nightmare, which is not real, but are you afraid? Are you frightened to death when you've just had that nightmare? Yeah, you can be sweating, you can be shaking, you can be really afraid, but it's not real, but you think it is. You experience it like it is. So it's fascinating stuff.
How the hell did you know I went to bed at 3 o'clock and had nightmares anyway? You think you know everything?
I can just read it, Dave. You're that kind, I'm sure.
I'm getting the creeps here. I can't get to sleep at 3 o'clock every night, and I have nightmares all the time. Now, I'm just having a little look. There hasn't been an awful lot of messages that have come in, actually, but there is some questions on there.
Okay.
Dave Harwood's asking you, do you have a pre-match routine before you meet the players?
Before I meet the players or before the players go and play?
Well, it says here before you meet the players. Doesn't that?
Well, before I meet the players, I mean, there's nothing specifically I'm doing before I meet the players, but what I'm advising the players to do 10, 15 minutes before they play is a pre-match routine, yes. Some reminders of what you're going to go out there and focus on. What's your attitude going to be like? Because your attitude is your choice. You know, what are you going to focus on? And you're not talking about strategizing against certain individual players that you're going to play against, because snooker is a game where there's a shot in front of you and you have to play the right shot for the best of your ability. But players have what we call a pre-recorded pre-match routine, and they're going to put their earphones in and listen to themselves, reminding them what they're going to focus on.
Interesting.
And the questions I ask after the match are, did you do this? Did you focus on that? And did you implement this? If you get the result, did you do the right things? Because if you keep doing the right things, the probability is you're going to perform.
We talked about, in the past, we've talked about shot routines.
Yeah.
You mentioned to me, you've mentioned 28 different shot routines. Can we talk about them, or is that you know?
Well, what these are designed to, first of all, with players that I haven't worked with before, to identify if there are some weaknesses in their game. And those shot routines cover all aspects. So we go from safety skills, long potting skills, break building skills, rest, playing from the cushion, cue ball control, etc. I'll give you one example of a routine. Is just the pinks and blacks. Pinks on the spot, the blacks on the spot. So this is a routine where you have to be 2 shots in front in your mind, but you have to be very skillful with the cue ball. And you're going to put the pink in the middle pocket, replace it, and put the black into a corner pocket. But after the black, you've got to go to the pink now into one of the black pockets.
Right.
Put the pink in the black pocket, black in the pocket, now pink into the middle. So it's not just anywhere, it's very specific, getting the right angle on the black all the time to get the cue ball for a pink in the middle or a pink in the corner. As an example, that's a cue ball control routine. And you've got to get 18 points. Pink and black's 1 point. If you get 18 points, that's 36 pots, which is like a total clearance, as an example. Then we have some shots from the cushion. Can you strike that light white plastic ball from the cushion into a middle pocket? And that might sound very simple, but if you can strike that ball into a middle pocket without side spin, then your cue ball striking from the cushion is excellent. You then might put that light white, Dave, on the blue spot and get the rest out. And can you strike that light white you've got there into a black pocket to identify if your cue ball striking the rest is any good? So there's a whole range of different shots.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the guys will probably question that, and I have too. I've spoken to you about this as to why we're using this very light plastic ball instead of a ball of the original weight. What difference does it make? Why? Why are we playing with this? You know, this ping pong type lighter ball. Why are we doing that?
All right. So a standard ball is 142 grams. That's about 17 grams. So basically, the tolerance level of that ball is so much smaller than a normal cue ball. In other words, can you strike that ball there in the middle when you're intending to? And because it's light, Dave, it will give you immediate feedback of exactly what's happening. Now, with feedback, you're not going to get the feedback to tell you exactly what's happening the way you would do with that ball. So that's one of the reasons why we use them. First of all, identifying problems. And also the light red, if a normal cue ball, 142 grams, hits that light red slightly off center on a straight shot, the dispersion amount of that light red is wider. So again, the feedback is going to tell you you're aiming to miss this shot, for example. The other big benefit of those two balls, there's no white lines on the cloth with repetition. You don't mark the table. You can play for hours with them, and you're not ruining your cloth as well. So there's lots of benefits with them. Once you've then understood what you need to do to fix things, you're now, and this is the key, you're habitualizing striking and aiming in a very small tolerance. So that is a powerful thing. Understand creating habits in a tight tolerance. It's big. Because in a match, you can feel a little bit more nervous, a little bit more tense. But if you're still within the tolerance for a 142 gram ball, you're going to be fine.
You know, we talk about all the things we've talked about this evening, and you know, we talk about cue ball striking, cue ball control, and dealing with all the pressures, and we cover all that there. And we quite often don't talk about the mistakes. We have some incredibly talented young players on the tour at the moment, and I watch them. I'm not going to mention their names. You know, I know them really well, and the thing is that I find that they play too quickly. They don't think enough, and they're not careful enough.
Right.
And you know, I get quite frustrated watching them. Chris, I kind of think you're an amazing talent. You know, you've got all this, and all right, maybe you're only 16 or 18 or whatever, but you, how do we fix this? What have we got to do to try and help you with this kind of thing? And do you see this yourself when you watch the?
I do. I mainly, the main thing that I see is the other way, when players are taking too long, especially in match tournament play. You know, they'll walk around the table, the brain will see a shot that's probably mostly is the right shot because that's why they've seen it. But then they can start looking around for other shots. When actually they know that's the right shot. And the problem is when you start taking too long, a little bit of anxiety and doubt can kick in, and you can start to overthink and start to think about the things you don't want to happen. That's one of the biggest mistakes. We're trying to think about only what we want to happen. So one massive piece of advice, and I shouldn't be saying this maybe, but I will do, is a little pre-shot commentary. Pop the red, stun for the black half ball. Tell the subconscious software what to do and have clarity. Stun the black in, cannon that second red. Great. Drop the red in and leave the white slightly high in the black. Play the shot. Clarity. And being absolutely certain what you're attempting to do, because a lot of players are between shots. They're making mistakes mentally. They're not clear on what they're doing even when they're playing the shot. And that can cause them to miss because they're not sure where they want the white to go. So rushing can be one, but rushing is far less likely in matches than taking too long, based on what I've seen over the years.
So overthinking can create its own anxiety, really, can't it?
We call it the instinct time frame. It's something I use in golf. At the end of the conscious process, you're pulling the trigger. You're not taking any more time. There's no need to take more time because the brain is very good at looking for problems. Don't give it time to find these problems. Just pull the trigger once you're ready. Just go. Not rushing, but not overthinking and taking too long.
We're coming to the end of this broadcast here very shortly. Chris, anything we're going to bring up? We're going to talk, lads, just before we carry on a little bit here. Just remember, Chris has a website, a Facebook page, chrishenrysports.com. It's got a Facebook page. I think most of you know it already. You know, you can go on there and have a look at a lot of material, a lot of video material that's on there already. There's a lot of information about how to get hold of the training balls and what have you. And we're also going to talk about what's coming up, Chris. I understand that there is some coaching going on in Belgium, and that you're coming over to the UK. We're going to organise some training and coaching days at Stratford Sports Club.
We have a level 1 Chris Henry coaching course. There's not many of them, but there's going to be one on the 25th and 26th of September in Belgium, not far from Bruges. We've got a couple of places left. It's already going to be almost full anyway. But for the first time, we're going to bring in a little bit of neuroscience and how the brain's working. But there's going to be a lot of stuff about the balls and how to use the balls properly, and how to use the balls to teach people to identify problems and how to fix problems in the best possible way. So that coaching course is over 2 days, 3-hour session Saturday, second 3-hour session Saturday, a little bit of a refresher on Sunday morning, and then there's an examination, written and practical. And if participants get through that exam, they'll have an official certification on being able to coach in those aspects that they've learned. And I'm hoping to do one at your club where you do a lot of your tournaments. So that's probably something next year. It's probably going to be February, March, where we'll do a coaching course over there as well.
I think I'll be very. So yes, guys, if you want more information on that, then just send Chris a message on his website. Again, chrishenrysports.com. Get in touch with him through there, or you can get in touch with him through, he's all over Facebook. Can't get rid of him, he's all over the place, you know. That's why he's on here, because he's trying to get his own show. I'm helping him. You know, he's nearly there,
I'll leave that to you, Dave. You're the expert on that side, mate.
Is there anything else we need to address? Have we covered? I tried to keep this down to an hour this evening. I think we've done quite well.
Yeah, it's very good. Yeah, it's very good.
No.
We've covered quite a few points.
Are you coming over to the UK anytime soon, or when is your next trip back over here?
I'm actually in the UK now. I'm in the
north. You're still where are you?
I'm in the north of England. I'm in Lancashire at the moment. Yeah. I'm going back to Belgium on Monday, and then I'll be back over here, back over to the UK, maybe even Northern Ireland as well for the tournament. Certainly for the UK Championships, Champion of Champions, and I'll be attending some of those tournaments in the next few weeks and months. Yeah.
Well, maybe we get over to the Northern Ireland Championship in October. You can buy me that dinner you promised me 2 years ago. You know. Well, guys, I don't know. 50 million pound a year sports coach. Right, that's it, guys. Thanks very much for joining us. This is obviously live on Facebook, it's live on YouTube. Be on YouTube. Just in case some of you have missed it, I'm going to post it all over the place so you can have a look at it on YouTube. All the tags will be on there, and all the significant keywords and things we've talked about. I'll make sure I put that on there, and you can look for it if you can't find it, but I'm sure you can find us. We've done enough of these for you to find us, haven't we, Chris? You know, they've got to know who we are by now. Great broadcaster, dull coach. What do you want? You know, it's great. Thanks for joining us, guys. Next week, I'm hoping I'll get back on the profiles again. So I'm hoping to catch up with Mark King, and then maybe Mark Joyce the week after, and we'll speak to professionals. I like to keep that on track and get a little bit of information about their careers and how they can help you and give you some feedback on how difficult it is on the tour. I'm sure you all know how difficult it is to make a living on the snooker tour. You know, this is why we're here. This is why we're having these chats, you know. But Chris, thanks very much again for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
Subject matter, and we're keeping them down.